What does it take to write characters that readers connect with? Ones they'll never forget. On this episode of The Writer's Journey, we'll ask the author of the hit Joe Ledger series and the Netflix-filmed V War novels how he writes characters readers love. Jonathan Maberry, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Lauren.
And welcome all the rest of our audience. I'm going to let you know we have discovered a slight temporal difference in our connections. So if we start talking over each other, we're going to try and give at least a couple second pause between our verbiages, just so that all of the stuffness can catch up to everybody else. And then we're not like, no, you go, I'm sorry. And then we're just doing that all the whole show. So, all right, Jonathan, holy Moses, thank you for joining us. Also, the delightful and delicious Chuck the Chuckman Chanley. So we're just going to jump right into it. Just jump in. So, what sorts of characters do you like to write? And in your opinion, what makes those characters, a lovable and relatable to you?
Well, I don't like writing characters that are absent of flaws. I don't like characters who are psychologically completely put together. So I've been through a lot in my own life, so I tend to gravitate toward people who have some scars, whether physical or emotional, sometimes both, and who have managed to incorporate those experiences into their lives rather than deny them. So my characters tend to be flawed. They tend to be complex characters, and I don't sacrifice character for plot. Even though I write some stuff that is, action thrillers with high concept, it's all about the characters. So I want to write about characters that I would want to know, or characters that I would believe are real. So that makes them more likable, because you can be, you can't become friends with a store mannequin. You become friends with a person. And I want my characters to actually be people as much as is possible.
It's a really good answer. Good answer.
Thanks. We're going to gold star.
Is that where you started as an author? Like you were just automatically from the very beginning drawn to these flawed characters? Or is that something that you kind of discovered over the course of writing?
Well, I kind of came to fiction late anyway. I started writing fiction in my 40s, didn't publish my first novel until I was 48. So most of my career as a writer has been nonfiction. And when I was writing, I was trained as a journalist. Even when you're writing an article for something like Black Belt Magazine, where you're doing a technical article, you still want to get inside the head of the people who are, you're focusing on as examples in your article, but who would be reading it. So it's always been about people to me, relating to people. I'm a teacher as well as a writer. And when I was teaching martial arts, it was never about learn this technique. It's how will you, as an individual who you are, be able to do a technique that gives you this measure of response. And so I've been working on that sort of thing my whole life, making it more about the human experience. When I turned to fiction, I started with the characters more than the. I knew I was going to write my first novel was a vampire in a haunted town, but that isn't something you can relate to. Even if you like hauntings, if you like vampires, the people in there caught up in extraordinary circumstances. So as I was creating those characters, I was thinking of people I actually knew and how I would, what they would do in the circumstances of the novel. And by basing it in each character in whole or part on different people, I was able to write about, genuine human experiences. And that made the characters more fun, made the story much more interesting to tell as a writer.
I want to jump on that comment you made about writing the action adventure thriller kind of stuff. And just for the sake of the audience, I'm not normally here on these shows, but I inserted myself because I'm such a Maberry fanboy. So just in case anybody's confused about why my ugly mug is up here with these ladies, now you know.
We love having you, Chuck.
But the question is, particularly in the Joe Ledger books, a lot of times in action adventure fiction, there's a tendency for the tough guy to be a little too tough. I mean, there's a fine line between tough guy trying to get the job done and douchebag bully. and you walk that really, really well in pretty much everything I've ever seen you ever read of yours. And I'm wondering, are you consciously aware of that line? And how do you balance those two things, given a good action hero without him becoming just a douchebag bully?
Yeah, well, I'm not a big fan of bullies of any kind anyway. And the Joe Ledger is a great example of what I was talking about earlier, in that he is psychologically flawed. The reason I picked him as the action hero for this is he isn't your basic stalwart knight on a horse, ready to go. He's not Lancelot, he's a guy who just happens to have, because of his life experiences, a lot of damage, but that damage has made him uniquely suited to solve certain types of problems, and he's hired to do that. And it's an interesting thing. Is his best friend is a psychologist, and his psychiatrist friend doesn't actually want him to do a lot of this stuff. He knows that even doing violence for the right reason is doing violence to yourself. It's creating harm. In there, that violence always leaves a mark. Well, that's become a key thing throughout the entire Joe Ledger series. Is he gets involved in these fights, and he is a tier 1 special operator fighter. He will win most of his fights, but at the same time, there's always a cost to it. It's not just, I killed somebody and that scene over, and there's no emotional or psychological repercussions. There always is. I've been doing martial arts. My bodyguard, I was a bouncer, been in a lot of fights, and I never had a fight where I walked away from it uninjured. I mean, I'm not talking about physically. It's left a mark on me. And I would, when I meet somebody who says that they don't get emotionally involved in a fight, then I think, all right, that's somebody's driving a car toward a wall at high speeds. They're going to crash, they're going to burn, and or they're going to do damage to the people around them because they've blurred the line between the necessary fight and just expressing your own anger and frustration. Right. I won't create a character that is merely a tough guy, nor will I create a character that's merely a villain. There have to be 3 dimensions and a lot of psychological underpinnings to it, or it's not interesting to write or read. That's why if you look at characters like Hannibal Lecter, he's a monster. He could have been written just as a monster, but Thomas Harris gave him such nuance that he's even charming, charismatic, and sympathetic, despite being an actual mass murderer cannibal. That kind of character nuance, that kind of subtlety and layer is what makes building great characters fun. It makes you feel like you're writing about people, not about just words that you've given a name to.
I really like the point you made, not forgetting the damage done to your characters, because this is definitely something I see through a lot of the edits that I do on other people's manuscripts. Is I'm like, hey, you totally forgot about this thing that happened, and how is that impacting the character in this situation now? I think it would. Or something totally random happens, but it's never resolved and it's never spoke about again. So there's no growth or degrowth from anything that could really make those small moments like even better, greater. So I like that that point.
And also there's a naivete that comes along with certain types of writing, and I'm not pointing out anybody in particular, but where you'll have somebody who will be in an action scene. Maybe there's a gunfight, maybe there's a fist fight, and there's no societal or legal things that follow the character after that. I mean, aside from the fact that any fight you get into, there is an emotional mark left on you, even if you can process it and kind of put it on a shelf later on, still there. But if you get into a gunfight, like it's some of these movies, say some of the novels, mystery novels, there's going to be legal repercussions to that. Even if you're completely justified, even if you have witnesses saying something, that's going to follow you. Plus, people around you are going to judge you by what you just did. Friends and family, neighbors, the other side, because people will, if you say you're a cop, writing a scene about a cop in a fight scene, there's a lot going on in our country with cops misusing their power and doing horrific things to folks. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. But at the same time, there are cops out there doing good jobs. Well, how do you make the cop character sympathetic without them being, without skewing them deliberately toward one political ideology? Well, you don't write for the people who are reading it in terms of their political expectations. You write about what it's like to be in the skin of that person, knowing that anything they do could be right or wrong. They could panic in the moment and do something horrible, or they could hesitate and let horrible things happen, or they could be blamed for something somebody else did. All these things are at play, and that gives the character so much complexity that write the scene, all of that is going to be at least alluded to in some way. So the character becomes, so that readers become are given the opportunity to be sympathetic to a character, even if they don't agree with that character.
So if you're thinking through all the different ripple effects and repercussions of an event happening, does that mean that in the drafting of your story, your things come up that you hadn't anticipated as a result of your scenes and kind of take you in new directions?
Yeah, that happens all the time. I'm a plotter. I plot my novels out. I even write scenes along the way to kind of anchor the plot in place. And we'll often write the ending, knowing how it ends. But at the same time, in the middle of the process, while writing the book, the characters hopefully become alive to you. And when that happens, they kind of take agency over who and what they are and what they do. An example of this in my Rotten Ruins series, which was a post-apocalyptic series about kids growing up 14 years after the zombie apocalypse. And, originally there was going in for one scene. I only intended to be one scene. And when I wrote that scene, it solved what I needed there to happen in that scene. But in the writing, she became much more interesting than I had anticipated. So much so that I wanted to see how she would be in another scene, and then another. And at one point, that I realized I had to replot the book because she's actually the co-star of the book, and became the co-star of the 7-book series that I just wrapped. You have to listen to your characters because they will sometimes tell you secrets that you weren't aware of. And besides that, you can't really expect to have all your best ideas and all your best character insights the day you write your plot out. That's unreasonable to expect that.
Absolutely.
Right there. Let's just put a pin right there. You are not going to have all your character insights and all the big juicy bits in your plot stage. So get in, get out, and get writing. All right. That's all I have to say.
Yep.
It's a good idea to have a game plan going into a book, but in my experience, you want to leave that open space between the major plot points for the discovery writing. Because like you said, that's the fun stuff. And don't hold on to that plan too tight, because it's going to, like you said, the characters will speak up and change your mind for you real quick.
Well, it's interesting. I liken that process to growing roses on a trellis. You build the trellis, that at the end of it, you want roses covering it and up the top. You cannot predict the exact pattern of their growth.
I love that.
Writing is so organic that as things happen, if you see that this particular vine 10 buds on it and this one has one, well, you're going to want to follow the one that's blossom more. You're going to, even if it's not going in the direction you had planned. I've had characters grow so much in the telling. In the Joe Ledger series, for example, there's a character named Toys who wasn't even in the first draft of the book. He was invented, by the way, because my editor said, love your villain, but he's in his own head too much. Give him someone to talk to. Give him a Watson. Yeah. So I created the character, and as soon as the bad guy, Sebastian Galt, started talking to Toys, their dynamic created a whole new insight into the story. Now that character is an ongoing character. He went from villain to kind of reluctant hero, and he's in the entire series of books. And in fact, the new one coming out in July, Relentless, he's plays a really big part in helping the hero with the challenges he's facing.
Sorry, I'm just thinking about the end of Rage. I'm not going to drop anything, but I'm just saying, man. That was a holy shit moment if ever there was one.
Yeah, that's an example of taking a psychologically compromised character and totally messing with him.
No kidding.
The version of him that you see in Relentless, just say that he's had some issues to sort out.
You think?
And, yeah, I got a lot of hate mail being raised too.
Did you really?
Why did you do that to him?
Oh my gosh, Brilliant. Yeah, Toys is a great character, and like you said, a perfect example of that kind of character that can just sort of pop up and take over. I've got
Yeah.
one in my space opera series that did that. She was supposed to be in one scene, but she's been in all three of the books so far. So I get
There
what
you
you're
go.
saying.
Yeah,
Right, we
and you
did-
mentioned also about not once again about not holding on
No
to
worries.
things. Sometimes you can't. There's a temptation to get in your own way when you're writing something
Oh
like
yeah.
that because you're so dedicated to the plot that you come up with. I by the time I finish my book, I will have gone through plot version 6, 7,
Right.
changing it as the story requires it.
I don't think I've written one yet where it looked like the plot outline by the time I was done with it. I mean, maybe the end and a couple things in the middle there, but most of it is it's almost like the plot outline is just kind of the spark to get the fire going, and
It's the mathematical formula of cause and effect. Everything else
Yeah.
is changeable.
right.
So that point you just made actually really answers this live question. What do you do when a character, when you want a character to do or feel a certain way, but it never seems to work? But if it doesn't work, the story can't follow the path you want it to follow. So, I mean, you got to relook at your plot. Like, why isn't your plot working if your character is telling you something else? So,
Well, there's a good chance it might not be the right character for the plot.
and that,
I've had a number of times when I've created a character and I thought this character was either the protagonist, antagonist, the main supporting character, and as the story goes on, I realize that forcing a fit, it's not a natural thing. But one of the ways to prevent that, or to lessen the frequency of that, is to spend some time. It's a trick my buddy David Morrell taught me. David Morrell created Rambo in the beautiful tragic novel First Blood, which bears over to the movie series. And what he does is he interviews his characters. He actually does an interview with the character about why that character is in that book or in that story. And it gives the interview will never show up in the book, but it really does give you insight into the character. The character gets to talk to you, and in talking reveals their person, reveals their likes and dislikes and forces at work in their life. But for folks who don't want to do that, there's also a really superb resource. It's the only writing book I ever recommend. Donald Maass, who's also a good friend of mine, he's a literary agent, represents Jim Butcher, among others. He wrote a book called Writing the Breakout Novel Workbook. Now, there's Writing the Breakout Novel, and there's the Writing the Breakout Novel Workbook. That workbook was recommended to me by thriller writer Vince Flynn, who's since passed. But a lot of us pros, we use that. We either buy a new copy and go through and answer all the exercises in the book before we plot our book, or somewhere about halfway through we'll go through and do all the exercises to make sure that our characters have earned their place and that the characters are really the right ones for this story. And also, if our character isn't feeling like he or she is coming alive, the exercises in that act help you dig deeper into the psychological underpinnings of motive for that character. And if you do the exercises, you'll understand, well, this character, I need to do this and this now for that character to work. Or I need someone else. That actor is fired. I need to recast that character. Who's going to be the protagonist in this from now on? So those are that book is a useful resource. I have a whole bunch of them on my shelf from previous novels I've done.
So Donald Maass, Writing Your Breakout Novel Workbook.
Workbook, yeah, that's Maass.
Yeah,
Great
it's a
book.
good
$20
one.
to
It's a
take back.
good one. Speaking of casting characters, I do that thing where you talk about where you interview the characters. That's how I kind of get a feel for their voice and stuff. I let them introduce themselves to me in their voice. But another thing that I do is for the visual aspects, like what they look like, so on and so forth, I actually will find pictures of them from actors or models or whatever. Do you do something like that?
I always Dreamcast, though I don't hold on to it for a couple reasons. But I do Dreamcast. Like when I was doing Joe Ledger, originally I had this is going back to 2008 when I was writing the book. I had Chris Evans in mind for Joe because I had liked him in this is before I saw him in Captain America. I liked him in Fantastic Four. He was the only good thing in the Fantastic Four movies.
I agree with that.
Funny, he was buff, he was good looking, he could play that role. But also Ryan Reynolds. because of his ability to handle action and comedy.
Yeah.
For Grace Cortland, I had Kate Beckinsale, and different actors in mind. Alec Baldwin was my original model for Mr. Church, because he's big and blocky, and that's
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And Alec Baldwin used to be buff, going back to Heaven's Prisoner stuff. He was ripped at one point. So you can see someone who used to be an athlete, and you know, now you can see that the athlete was there once, you know.
Right.
So I Dreamcast, but the reason I don't publish my Dreamcasts anymore is because a lot of my stuff is under option or in development, and I don't want to interfere with any potential process of a producer or my agent reaching out to an actor and saying, hey, we think you'd be right for this, and then he sees on Facebook that I'm talking about somebody else. So,
yeah, that's a good problem to have.
Yeah, like when I did V-Wars, my idea for the main character, Luther Swan, was basically, a kind of a young Robert Redford type, like blonde hair, blue-eyed,
right,
kind of country boy turned city scholar. And Ian Somerhalder is not that. Granted, he's from the country. He's, grew up Cajun in the suburbs of New Orleans, but he's certainly not blonde, and you'd never really expect him to work on a farm, except he and his wife now own a farm. But he doesn't look like the type who owns a farm.
Books and covers.
So
right?
I've learned to adapt in my viewpoint of what the character should look like. I still Dreamcast for myself. I just no longer publish it on social media.
Was that interesting for you to see how the Netflix folks casted your characters and made it come live, but it's a different vision? It's probably not the same vision you had in your head when you were writing the books. No.
Netflix did a really good job with it. I would like them to have been a little more aggressive in terms of going after issues of racism. I thought they softened that a little too much. The amount of racism that I wanted to cover in the book is similar to what Damian did with Watchmen, where it pulled no punches at all.
Yeah.
We wanted to do that, and Ian also wanted to do that. So, since the show was COVID killed our show. Well, I mean, it's a show about an outbreak right at the beginning of an outbreak.
Of an outbreak.
Right. Oh yeah.
So, but get the rights to it back, which we're working on, and he and I are planning to do a new version of the show where we go way deep into issues of racism, intolerance, and so on. And that should be a lot more. This should be a lot of fun.
Why did you put those themes in your book? Like, what were you hoping to get out into the world?
Well, I grew up in a neighborhood that was intensely racist. My father was intensely racist, KKK racist.
Oh.
And I was born into that environment and probably should have wound up just like him. But I was a reader, and I wound up reading early issues of the Fantastic Four back in the 60s when they introduced T'Challa. Here's a black character who was nobody's sidekick. He was the comical, horrible step and fetch it sort of character. He was a king. He was one of the greatest scientists in the Marvel universe, and he was a kick-ass fighter. And I'm like, holy crap! I've never seen that sort of thing before. Forward to 2009 when Reginald Hudlin, who was writing Black Panther, heard me talking about that and suggested that I be the writer on Black Panther after him because T'Challa saved my life too. I mean, he turned me away from the propaganda I was learning growing up and opened my eyes to what the world really is. I learned because of that character, I learned about the Jim Crow laws, diversity, apartheid, all of that. So naturally, it's going to be reflected in what I choose to write. I have a really strong mission to include as diversity in my own characters and in stories that I commission as an editor for both Weird Tales magazine and for the anthologies I write. I include a lot of people of different experiences, LGBTQ, people of color, people of different religious experience, because it's one big world. It's not, I know I'm a straight white guy, and that's a certain image. I don't want to be the cliche version of that. I want to be the guy who is out there looking at how many wonderful stories there are to tell if you just look around you, not just in one line.
Yeah.
And that's become a factor in my writing. And sometimes get fried for it. People will say, "Oh, you're being a social justice warrior." Well, here's the thing about that. First, kiss my ass. Second, I don't see anything wrong with promoting social justice. And I know they use that as a pejorative. I don't. But I'm not political either. I'm not right or left. I am a humanist, just like most of my characters. Joe Ledger, he hates politicians on both sides of the aisles. He likes people. So if a politician gets in the way of what's good for the people, doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat, he's not going to like them, and nor will I. So, and that kind of gets reflected in my writing as well.
So it sounds like we're touching on a bunch of different ways that characters can be lovable, and they're not always touchy-feely or 100% morally upright. Like you mentioned Hannibal Lecter, like way back when. Yeah. Some characters we love even though like they're terrible and they're really flawed, but other characters we love because they changed our lives, right? Yeah. Like this guy from Fantastic Four changed your life, and maybe the person who came up with it wasn't expecting that. I don't know. Maybe they were. Maybe it was planned. But there are different reasons.
Stanley and Jack Kirby were definitely making a point when they created T'Challa.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that was 1965, I think that character came out. They were, I mean, Stan Lee, and Kirby, these guys were dealing with racism and anti-Semitism and other things from World War II on up, the McCarthy era and all that. And they were pulling very few punches with their comics. I mean, the whole Professor Xavier and what's his name? Magneto. Yeah. That's MLK and Malcolm X. But with white characters, so the white readers would read it and get an idea of what it's like to both with a similar vision for freedom, but different pathways to get there. They were the first comic company to do something about drugs, and they had to take even the Comics Authority Code off the issue of Spider-Man when they did a drug story. Now, those guys have been fearless for years, and were my storytelling heroes because of that.
I have to say I applaud you for this because I grew up where I didn't fit anywhere, right? Because I'm a person of color, I guess technically. So I didn't fit with the people of color because I grew in a majority white family. My dad was black, my mom's white, but I didn't fit in the white because of my skin color. Most of my family was heavily racist. So the fact that you are tackling just that emotional upheaval, that strength of character, the determination to break those boundaries through your words is hugely impactful. And I hope one day I can write a story just as strong as that. Yeah.
Write it from your heart. You probably will.
Yeah. Yep. That has to be my next one, because it's really inspiring, because it's like there are a lot, we all have our own individual things that we've gone through, and we can use that and squeeze the juice out of it and put that into our characters, and that is what makes them lovable, because they've lived. So if you don't let your characters live, how are your readers supposed to exist with them?
Yep. And if you're afraid to tackle the tough issues, you're going to cheat the readers who are out there looking for someone to speak to their actual experience. If you and I'm using this phrase deliberately, if you whitewash a lot of stuff, then you're only going to appeal to the audience that likes the sanitized versions of the truth. That's what's the value of reading it? What's the value of writing that? And for publishers, what's the value of publishing it if it doesn't go deep? Not that it's supposed to be preachy, but it's supposed to reflect the real world. The real world is a lot more diverse, and there are issues in there that are uncomfortable. All right, let's talk about them. And by the way, in terms of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, those genres have always done that. One of my favorite examples, if you go back to the original Star Trek, there was an episode, and a very character-driven episode too, where you had two characters who were the last members of their planet. One is white on this side and black on the other. The other is black on this side and white on the other. To everyone else, they look indistinguishable. But they hate each other for the difference, and their races have fought to the edge of extinction, and they can't come back from that hatred and eventually do go extinct because they kill themselves because one feels they have to win to prove that they are the superior version of the race. Now, you couldn't have put an hour drama on television in the 60s about race, but you certainly could if they were aliens.
Exactly. That's the beauty of the genre fiction, because you can make up the amalgams that you need to get your point across. I remember that episode distinctly because when they finally explained to the crew why they hated each other, the crew was like, "Oh, I didn't even notice that." They were like, "Oh yeah, you are. Look at that. I didn't even know."
That's nifty.
And yet, much as I love Star Trek, there was some racism in the show too. Very few black characters, though they did have a bridge officer, Lieutenant Uhura, who we were all in love with. But also, there was some prejudice against Spock for being half human, half Vulcan.
Mm-hmm.
And that was supposed to be done as humor and exploration of, I know Roddenberry said that Spock he imagined Spock as somebody coming from a communist country to a non-communist country and then learning, how to relate more to people. I thought that was racist. He was trying not to be, but was managing to be racist on that. So it's still a journey for everyone who tells those stories. It doesn't mean that if you include diversity, you're immediately then free of checking yourself and your characters to find out if they are in fact free of cliche. And that's an important thing with characters, because it's easy to build characters based on cliche versions.
Yeah.
But we've seen that. There's no writing challenge in that.
Right.
Maybe he met someone that convinced him of that. I'm thinking back to a conversation I had on the boardwalk with a Russian lady, and she's actually criticizing me for showing my emotions so much on my face, and like, you Americans, you show your emotions on your face, and it reminds me a little bit of Spock. But you're right. We don't want to fall into those stereotypes, and especially if it perpetuates some kind of like cultural looking down on another culture or another race and not seeing them as individuals.
Yeah, and they criticize Spock for not showing emotion when it's his cultural bias. I mean, the whole part of his culture is to contain the emotions, but you just don't.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet they criticize him for it. They later on in Star Trek Next Generation, they use an android for the same effect, Data. And I thought I just finished reading and cover quoting Brent Spiner's biography, hilarious autobiography. But that was a challenge too, because he was representative of somebody who was marginalized because he wasn't quite human by the human standards, and they explored that. They humanized him, but I would have liked to have seen him find an identity that wasn't quite human, that was uniquely his own, and the actor tried to bring that to the role.
All right. On that point, I'm going to super awkwardly and epically segue into the spotlight. All right. Today's spotlight is on Relentless, a Joe Ledger and Rogue Team international novel by Jonathan Maberry. In New York Times bestselling author Jonathan Maberry's thrilling Relentless, Rogue Team International joins Joe Ledger in a new hunt that spans the globe and journeys deep into the terrifying landscape of the human heart. Joe Ledger's world has been torn apart. The people closest to him have been savagely murdered, and Ledger is on the hunt for the killers. His already fragile psyche has cracked apart, allowing a dangerous darkness to overwhelm him. His hunt takes him deep into the world of the deadly black market weapon cells, and standing in his way are a new generation of private military contractors. These mercenaries have been enhanced with cutting and chemical enhancements, transforming them into real-world super soldiers, stronger, faster, harder to hunt, and fitted with built-in weapons. They are beyond anything Joe has ever faced. But he is not the Joe Ledger they expected to fight. He is defined by the darkness now. The attempt to destroy him, to break him, has backfired. Instead, his enemies have turned him into a far more fearsome weapon. Everyone is out for blood. and doom. Click by now. End scene.
Yeah, it comes out in July, and I'll be writing the new one a little later this year. It'll be number 13, I think.
Yay! So more coming.
So I'm doing epic fantasy now, and that's interesting, and a whole different set of characters, because you have to decide how much of contemporary relationship structure you want to bring into something that's set in a different era, different fantasy world. Leaning a little more toward how they did it in Game of Thrones, where the conversation still tends to be the way people speak, rather than Lord of the Rings, where people speak in proclamations and so on. So I'm having some fun with it.
Did you come up with the characters first for that epic fantasy series? A character idea first, or was it a plot idea that came to you first?
In this particular case, it was funny because my editor at Macmillan just kind of called me out of the blue and asked me if I had ever considered writing epic fantasy. And because it had not been something I'd done to that point, except for a couple short stories. But I said, yeah, I have something cooking. And really what I had was a character. I had a guy who had his job had been to protect the children of this empress and this, big empire in this fantasy world. And he wakes up drunk in a prostitute's bed in a tavern while the city is being overrun and all of the kids are dead. So he has failed in every important way to do what he was supposed to do. He doesn't know, and he won't find out until much later, that he was drugged. He was deliberately taken out of the action. But he considers himself an oath breaker, and by his religious beliefs, he's damned. And the series is called Kagan the Damned. And so a lot of it is what happens when somebody who is like that is not only a failure in everything he believes in, but he thinks he is, even though he's alive still, that he's damned. And once he dies, he's going, to the pit. So how does a person live a life knowing that that's happening? So that's the fun of this character. He's doing things very badly because he feels that his life is just trending that way. And I'm getting to the point where he's beginning to realize that he may have, and that will cause him to get a little cranky.
We lost that one word. He may have what?
Wait, what's that?
We lost the one word. He may have what?
Been duped. And so now he's now he's starting to get cranky about it. And it's fun because there's not usually a lot of humor in epic fantasy. So I've had a lot of fun putting humor in it as well. And I've been hired back to back. So that'll be a total of about 260 to 270,000 words between the two books. So I'm having fun. I'm 90,000 words in.
Well,
Nice.
that is definitely a fun character to kind of like delve into, because he thinks he's damned anyway. So,
and it's also one of the fun things. Also, is the most fearsome fighter of that age of the world is a woman named Marissa, the known as the Poison Rose, and that's his mother. So he actually learned his fighting from his mother, not his father. And that's going to be fun to put into the story, because some of her backstory's in there as well. And the second book will actually be called The Son of the Poison Rose. So it's kind of fun, because usually it's passed down from father to son. It's like, we don't need that shit. We've seen that already.
I'm jealous of your titling. It's gorgeous.
So you've
Thanks.
published thousands of books and you've gotten hundreds of reviews back from your readers. What do they seem to love and connect with your characters?
It's interesting. Almost all of the comments about my books are about the characters, not about the plot. I take that as a great triumph. They ask about the character. Like, I get fan mail for the fictional dog in the Joe Ledger series. I'm talking actual fan mail addressed to Ghost, the dog.
People love a good animal.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
that's good.
one of the things that makes me happiest about this is that people are, the fans are reacting to these people as people. They're concerned about what's happening with the characters. They ask about what Joe or Top or Bunny or some other characters are doing even between books. Like so, what are they up to? It's like, all right, they're probably sitting, having a beer, eating fish tacos, and talking. It's like they're off the clock right now. People love talking about the characters, and I never expected. I mean, I want that to be what I do as a writer, to inspire people to relate to the characters. I never expected that to be the primary source of emails is questions about the characters. That's freaky fun.
What do you attribute that to? How do you think that came about?
I think it's what we were saying when we first started. I don't write stories where the plot matters more than the characters.
Yeah.
And I try to write characters that are nuanced, that aren't just there to deliver lines. What happens in the story matters to them, and it echoes through their lives just as it would in the real world. So by basing it on, like, taking 5 or 6 of my friends and using them as the basis for characters allows me to imagine how real people would react, because I know these real people and I've seen them. If I've known them for years, I've seen them in a variety of crisis situations or domestic situations or whatever, and I have a good idea of how they would react. So I can actually build characters that are amalgams of real people, and I think that's what the readers are relating to. They're seeing them as people.
Well, we have some Ghost fans in the house right now.
Yeah.
Kelly Colby and Wayne Ligon.
Nice.
We had a question earlier from Kelly. I see Lost Roads on your shelf. How did I miss its release? I need to order it now.
Came out November 7th. It is the 7th book in the Rotten Ruin series. And a lot of people don't. There was an issue. My editor, who was overseeing that series, passed. The editor who came in to replace him really thought that the last 2 books of the series should be a spin-off rather than a continuation. Instead of it saying book 6 or book 7 of the Rotten Ruin, it's book 1 and book 2 of the Broken Lands, and it flew completely under the radar of all the Rotten Ruin fans. I am not happy about that. Because it merely is the culmination of what started in Rotten Ruin, and it takes the characters all the way up to the end. And Joe Ledger is in those books. He shows up in the Rotten Ruin as a 65-year-old man in the 3rd book, in Flesh and Bone. So it's one possible feature of Joe Ledger, and he gets crankier as he gets older.
Oh, okay. And we had a question from another Kelly Powers. She asked, are there certain lessons in the book you mentioned before, writing the Breakout novel Workbook, you suggest for pre-writing and others for revision?
Well, it's kind of funny because the book can be used for pre-writing or for revision. And I would go through it and just read it first. Read the lessons and maybe try a couple first and see if they're speaking to whatever your needs are to either get up to speed to start writing, or if it's something that you feel should wait. And sometimes you can just use Post-it to note those exercises that really should wait until you have more substantial material down. I like doing it at the beginning because it helps me get deeply into the character so I can construct a plot. But I also go through it usually after my first draft. I'll go through and just take a couple of the exercises and kind of check to see if I've done my actual work the right way. It's a great way for me to do a quality control on what I've written.
Thank you.
But everybody uses that book differently.
So lots of different ways to use it. I like that. It's ambiguous in the way you can use it.
Yeah.
And a little bit earlier in the show, Bard of Today also asked, and I hear this question a few times from different authors, what's your recommendation on killing off major characters, specifically in the middle of the series? Dun, dun, dun.
You've never done that, have you, Jonathan?
Yeah, no. I'm horrifying. But, here's the thing about that. Often, if a character is going to die, I know that early on. Like with Rotten Ruin, when we first sold Rotten Ruin, it was supposed to be a one and done book. But the editor, David Gale, who bought it, after they do the negotiation with the agent and the deal was made, the editor then calls you for that first real conversation. And during the call, he said, I think we're talking several books here. He had to go back and renegotiate the deal. So it wound up being originally a 4-book deal. And I sat down thinking, well, I'm going to be with these characters for 4 books. What are their arcs? So I I spent a couple days just working out what the character arcs are, and I knew that one important character had to die at the end of the second book, or the main character was not going to be able to grow enough into his own power. It's kind of similar to when you kill off Obi-Wan and Gandalf and Yoda, and this is something I believe Joseph Campbell may have talked about along the way.
Yeah.
It's something that happens when you can't have your parent role there to both protect you and make all the decisions. You either have to leave them on a quest somewhere, or that character has to leave the story. And so in that one character in Rotten Ruin, I knew that character's death was coming. In Joe Ledger, there was a character who dies at the end of the second book I knew was coming, because originally that character was supposed to die in the first book. But as I write the series, and I write a lot of series, there are times you feel a character has done the work they need to do, and their death would throw a big stone into the waters, causing lots of ripples. It'll change the dynamic of how characters relate, and also change the dynamic of how I relate to the way in which the story needs to be told. So a character may die, may leave a series. I had one major character exit the series after a stroke. They don't always die, but sometimes they do have to leave, and I grieve for those characters. And there are characters I wish I could bring back, but it would cheat to do so. I'm not going to have somebody suddenly find a twin, or that was my clone who died. You got to have the courage to do what is necessary without, and this is the key, without doing it for gratuitous shock purposes. And like in Game of Thrones, killing off Ned Stark was a really important statement. If he dies, no one is safe. Right. But along the way, I think some of the deaths there, and in Walking Dead, I think some of them were there because the staff, the writers' room was like, we haven't killed anybody off. We're not getting as much internet buzz. Who's on the chopping block, so that we can own the next cycle.
So you definitely need to have, it has to be wrapped up in a reason,
Yes.
Growth of another character, their personal growth, the situation they're in, if it's just for, let's see what buzz happens when this character dies, it's that has nothing to do with the story or, that. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's the same thing if you're going to put in an action scene, a love scene, sex scene, or something along those lines, it can't just be pasted in because you haven't done one since X number of chapters back. It has to fit the flow of the story, and it has to advance the characters. Action scenes in particular have to advance the character arcs, not just the plot. The characters need to be changed because of that action scene, and then the plot needs to pivot on it. It can't just be shoehorned in because there was a gap there. Need a scene, and I know writers who will do that. Will say every X number of chapters, I need action. Well, that's not how life works. So why should it be how fiction works?
So I like that reasoning behind why this extremely emotional moment, and then not forgetting to have the aftermath, like we were talking about earlier, the impact on the characters and how that then pushes them forward internally, how it's now impacting they're going through, furthering in the plot, what they would have done it completely changed without the one character beside them. So important not to forget that as well.
Yeah. Now, I teach a workshop writing fight and action scenes, and one element of that, other than the technical parts of how to write a fight scene, one element of that is what will that fight scene do for everything that follows it? If there is no echo of that going through the book in one way or another, the fight scene's gratuitous. So you either need to take the fight scene out or replot it so that it is actually necessary to the entire story. And that's the better writer challenge. Not to bail on it, but to find a way to make it work in a really satisfying way. Take risks.
Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my brain around that. Mostly what I see in manuscripts where I say, cut the scene, it's a meeting scene where the characters are having like a long dialogue discussion about their plans, the plans, to execute the plans, and then I go, let's have some action. But you're saying even the action scenes need to be purposed, and they need to be part of that development.
Yeah.
Character development.
There's a couple of stories where I've done action scenes that, as I'm writing them, I'm like, all right, this just feels like I was in a cranky mood this morning. My coffee didn't taste good, so I'm going to have two people beat each other up. And you fall back and you meet your plot, and you realize that at some point you've deviated from the imperative cause and effect nature of the plot. So you retool it, and that makes a writer grow when they. Well, first off, writers should always be paying attention to their process, always. This is not what we do. This is a blend of natural storytelling gifts, and a hell of a lot of acquired craft skills. Well, nothing should happen without our control over it. And if we find that it is, then we go back and find the point where we lost control and start rewriting from that point, so that we are the god of that particular universe, and a compassionate god who actually cares about the characters in the story.
I want to get back on the character thing. A few seconds ago, you talked about kind of shoehorning in action scenes just for the sake of having the action scene. And I'm going to preface this question by saying I am a huge fan of including all genders and races and so on and so forth in my work and in anybody else's work. I think that's great as long as they're well done characters and everything. But I have read a lot of reviews on books where they talked about shoehorning in a diverse character of some sort because it's politically correct or whatever. And I've actually seen examples where I felt like that was happening. How do you address balancing the necessity of a character with the diversity of a character?
Well, I like diverse characters anyway, because it offers opportunity for characters to come at conversation and events from different perspectives. So that's part of it. But if I find, and I've only done it once or twice, I luckily none of those made it to print. Sometimes you want to put a character in there because, like I met a friend, met a guy who was a Sikh, and I hadn't known any Sikhs personally. And I was fascinated by the guy, by what he had to say about what his beliefs were and how they impacted his daily life. And so I put a Sikh character in there. But at the time, I really didn't understand that much about Sikhism. So I realized I was putting him in there because I thought the guy I met was cool. And I wanted him in the story, but that's stunt casting. That's not really story appropriate. So actually what I did is I got on this is before Zoom, I got on a phone call with him, and we just talked and talked and talked, and I explained my problem with the character. And as a result, I was able to write that character with a little more personality depth, and I was able to find a way for that character to belong to the story more. Now, it's important for writers to not do stunt casting and to do a lot of research. In Ink, which is my most recent novel, it's a standalone horror novel, there are two different bits of research I did. One was on tattoos, because the book deals with tattoos. I have no tattoos myself. So I wanted to get inside the head of why people would get tattoos, what the tattoos mean, did the meanings change, and so on. You can't do that through assumption. So I interviewed a couple hundred people, talked to people. Also, I wanted a romance between a lion and a bi-curious woman, because it reflects some people that I know. But I don't want to write that romance from a cliche white straight perspective. So I interviewed women who were bisexual, women who are lesbians, women who are bi-curious, just to find out what their experience is. And that allowed me to write characters that are beyond my personal experience, but from a point of view, because I have had those conversations, deep conversations, listening to them, not just asking and getting an answer, listening to what they have to say about their experience. And often people who are in any way different than me, what don't I know enough about your experience to even ask? And that's where a lot of the conversations really catch fire. Writers should do that kind of homework.
I have to agree. We've had a couple conversations in our past episodes that touch on that, where, when you don't know something, go ask someone. In the sci-fi marine world, if you don't know what the weapons are, go talk to a Marine, go talk to a veteran, and then don't be afraid to, ask about their experiences, because that's going to make those characters even more real, because people will feel the difference, even if they don't know what that difference is, because maybe they're not an ex-Marine, but for some reason it doesn't feel right, which then comes back to that, well, this just feels shoehorned in. So definitely,
there's a difference between doing that kind of research, which is the kind of research writers should do, talk to the people who understand, as opposed to writing it and then just getting a sensitivity reader. To me, that's cheating. Yeah. I want to do the research. I actually want to deepen my understanding, my insight, stoke the fires of my own empathy by talking to people to understand who they really are, not just having them go in and correct things for me. So you don't need sensitivity readers as much if you're doing the homework and you're paying attention. And somebody had posted a float past here about, I even asked people on Facebook. I do. I ask my fans quite a lot. And that's where I get a lot of these folks to be able to talk to me about their experiences. I say, hey, I'm doing research on this, message me. I don't have the conversation in public. I have a email or message or phone or whatever, so that they can speak frankly and, help me write characters that are as alive as possible. Characters I want to know about, that I would, like as you're writing one, you get to something, a scene where like, okay, we didn't cover this in the conversation. I need to go and have another conversation. Don't be lazy and skip that. Go have that conversation.
I love that. Don't be afraid to talk to people and dig deep, because it's okay. Yeah. It's not a bad thing. It's actually a really good thing.
Really, really good thing. And it's fun too, because, people always have a story. Everybody has their own story, man. That story is usually something, since they're usually not writers, it's great for us to say, oh my God, I got to use this. And Ink has a lot of that. Ink actually is my favorite book I've written so far.
Oh. What else makes it your favorite?
Check that out.
It includes cameos from characters from other books, even though it's not a continuation of any other books. Vin Diesel is currently reading it, which is kind of fun. And it also is my creepiest villain by a mile. I'm not even sure where the hell he came from. Well, actually, I am, but he's really creepy. And a lot of people are saying that, oh my God, he gave the nightmares. I'm like, yes.
Which characters are your favorite kind to write? Like these creepy villain characters, or the selfless hero, the sacrificial hero?
Believe it or not, it's what I call an incidental character. For example, in one of the Joe Ledger books, I think it was Deep Silence, there was a character who had a stroke, and the hero, injured his back, which action heroes usually do, back injury, right? So he's trying to carry her away, and he's failing and falling, and he can't do it. And this young African-American guy comes up and just says, let me help. And he picks her up and he carries her to the car. And Joe tries to thank him, and the guy wasn't doing it for thanks. And Joe offers him a card, and the guy's backing up, saying, I didn't do this for anything. Off at Joe. But really, Joe just, is so touched by that level of ordinary heroism and compassion that he just wants the guy to know that if he ever needs anything, you can call. But it's so Joe, that's not the reason. And Joe's reaction is a bit of white male privilege in a moment like that. And Joe gets called on it. And that was a lot of fun to write. Characters like that, he's only in that one chapter, that character. I get requests from him every week for more stories about that character, but that character isn't the hero character. He's an ordinary, what I call an hero. People who find that in a moment of crisis, they have depth to them that people who would never guess because they're being judged on their appearance. And those types of characters are a blast to write. I welled up when I wrote that chapter.
That's one of the questions I've been having in my head. Oh, sorry, Kalene, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
One of the questions while you've been talking is, do your characters kind of become your friends? Like, they seem like they're really your friends, like they're moving your heart, even though you imagine them up. Do they become your friends?
They do. And one of the weird side effects, writers will get this, non-writers will think I need help, but characters sometimes just talk in my head. Like, I'll hear Top and Bunny from the series just shooting the shit, talking. I'll
totally normal.
I'll tune into to Joe Ledger talking to his girlfriend, and it'll just be playing on a screen in the back of my head. I'm aware of it, so they're real people to me. And when they have to leave the series, I grieve. And when I'm done with them for a book, like, which is one of my also one of my favorite books. There's a whole group of characters in this Narcotics Anonymous group, and I loved every one of those characters. And they're only there for that book. They will not show up in another book. I miss them, but I'm not going to bring them back just for sentimental reasons. There would have to be a story for them to come back to. But I missed them when they were done. They were totally real, and I had fun with them.
I love that you get into such a deep connection with your characters. Like, they're just sitting there. He's your buddy. She's, your best friend. You guys are having beer or tea together, just talking. That when you are writing those scenes, your real emotions are literally happening.
Yeah.
Your heart might actually be pounding. The tears are actually starting to well up. When I find those are always my best moments and my best scenes, when I myself can't stop either the anger or the sadness or just like the giddy happiness that might be happening from bubbling up inside me. In that moment, I've created that connection that a lot of us are searching for. So if you ever feel that, writers out there, if you ever feel that while you're writing, remember it and keep trying to get it.
I've always believed that art in general is really just the transfer of emotions from a creator to a consumer through whatever your medium happens to be. Whether it's a written word or dance or whatever. If the creator is feeling something and successfully gets that feeling across through their medium, then you've done it right. I mean, that's I think that's kind of what you're shooting for all the way through.
It is, and also this happens. It should happen even if you're writing characters that aren't of your creation. Because I worked for Marvel for years. I was the regular writer on Black Panther. I wrote Punisher and Captain America and a bunch of other stuff there. I've worked with in media tie-in writing, which is when you write stories set in someone else's world for pay as opposed to fan fiction. I've worked in the True Blood universe. I've worked in Hellboy and John Carter's Mars, Sherlock Holmes, Deadlands. And each of those things, some of the character setups are not mine, but I have to find a way to fall in love with those characters, to relate to those characters, and take a degree of agency over them so they are mine while I'm writing them. Even if it's a character who is as two-dimensional as the Punisher can be in comics. I tried to write him where there is a lot of complexity, just under this iron control that is as much a danger to him in stifling him as it is a useful tool when dealing with the bad guys. And that's fun too. You find ways to love characters in a different way because you're able to collaborate with the character, so to speak. And that's fun.
Yeah.
That's something I hadn't thought of. Yeah, like because there are a lot of authors out there, especially in the indie space, where people are being brought in to collaborate on new series because, hey, this character really needs their own series. I don't have time to do it. You need to help me out. And so they're not characters that you initially have written. Like you're saying, you have to find a way to fall in love with them and to be on Patricia Gilliam, and to be on that same space as the original author without doing the character disservice, but actually uplifting them potentially even more because maybe you see a part of them that the author didn't see. And I like that. That's a good unexpected character.
It is fun, and it's also fun when the license holder for that gives you a little bit of license, a little bit of latitude to be able to explore. When Reggie Hudlin was writing the Black Panther comic, he had made it very political, but mostly dealing with the politics of race. When I took it over, I made it. I dealt with more of the politics of state, of governmental politics, something that I'm pretty interested in, and without removing the elements of race, but shifting them because Reggie had his focus, and I had mine within the book, and different writers have come along and then taken the same set of characters, and often finding within a group of characters a different point of view character. Like my point of view character was Shuri, because when I was writing the book, it was the first time Shuri stepped into the Panther's mantle.
Right.
And so she was the Black Panther, and she was not the scientist you see in the movie version. She's basically the Lindsay Lohan of Wakanda up until then, who has to kind of level up to take over the role when her brother is critically injured. And that was a journey worth exploring as a writer. I got, people fell in love with the character that they had not really liked before. And it was a nice setup for Reggie to kind of turf that over to me, partly because he knows, my background with racism, but I taught women's self-defense for 35 years. So he knew that I really appreciated strong women and how tough women can be. And it was fun to be able to put my mark on that. And there's a possibility some of that may even show up in the next Black Panther movie.
Cool.
I have to say, the statement, bringing out a character that people before didn't really like and now they like her. I loved that feeling when a reader was like, I hated this character. I loathed him. I couldn't wait till you killed him. And damn you, I did something toward the book 4, and they're like, I like him now, and I understand it, and I want to punch you. And I'm like, sweet, did my job.
Yeah. I have a couple of villains that people are asking me to bring back, but they're dead. There's a character named Mother Knight from my Code Zero book, who was the most emotionally fractured of all my characters, and all my villains. People keep asking me if there's some way to bring her back, and I'm like, she's really dead. She's like extremely dead. Yes. It's not like she was just laying there bleeding a little bit last time we saw her. She was shot multiple times in the chest and fell off a balcony on a high floor at a hotel in Atlanta. Pretty much dead. That'll do it, you know.
But I mean, come on. She attacked Dragon Con with a horde of zombies, so she had it coming.
I got a lot of folks at Dragon Con cosplaying Mother Knight because of that.
That's fantastic. Nice. I love that.
That's awesome. All right.
Well,
so we are. Oh, man, we did go a little bit over, which is okay because the conversation is fantastic, and we could probably continue chatting.
You guys are fun to talk to.
We could. Oh yeah, we could go on for a whole nother hour. I'm fairly certain, and we still got a whole lot of people watching, but we do have to end it at some point. Bom, bom, bom.
Well, bring me back sometime.
So, absolutely. Yes. We're definitely going to have Jonathan Maberry back, especially if he wants to come back and hang out with us.
This is a really fun you guys are asking great questions. You got a really good conversation started because of the questions you're asking.
Yay. So, this whole time I've been thinking, so we could bring him back for action scenes. We could bring him back to talk about Marvel, Punisher. But is it too soon to ask?
I'll come back to talk about anything.
Yes.
All right. So you heard it here, folks. We're definitely going to have Jonathan.
For comics myself. Yeah. That's just me.
Comics
We're definitely going to have him back. We're going to dig deep on other things that he just so gloriously gives the expression and makes it easy to digest. Everyone in the live audience, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing this experience. We hope that you at least get one bit of nuggets to bring into your own writing, to bring your characters more to life, to not only for you to connect with them, for your readers to connect with them as well. And with that, for Lauren Moore and Chuck Manley, I am Kalene Williams. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Be sure to check out next week. We're going to talk about more reading, writing, and everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium's The Writer's Journey.